in the air with the warmer weather, more people are getting outside enjoying Mother Nature. But being outside more means you see more, and sometimes not all of it is so pleasant to look at. But when does code enforcement get involved, and when should they get involved? With us this morning, we are so blessed to have in studio with us the one, the only West Bloomfield Township Supervisor Steve Kaplan. Great to have you with us, and in person. I haven't seen you in person, and gosh, it's been over 2 years, Steve.
Right. Good morning, Ronnie. I look better on the radio.
No, you don't. No, you don't. It's so great having you, and I think this is such a timely topic because, Steve, I'm a little worried. I've been trying to take part in that no mow May. Well, really, my husband wants to take part, right? We argue about mowing our grass, but we're not, it's not looking so nice right now. But code enforcement, what is their job?
Code enforcement involves a municipality, a city, a village, or a township enacting rules which govern not behavior, but govern how people use their property. And there are penalties associated with violations. The idea is nobody wants to live in an area, Ronnie, which is replete with blight. Nobody wants to drive down a street and see that many of the homes have large dandelions and unkept grass. The idea is it's quality of life. And property values are interwoven here, because if you have a city where property is not maintained, then that's going to affect the sale price, and people won't want to move into that area.
I think about this, Steve, because as you know, I was kind of the blight girl in Detroit my last years at Channel 7, and you don't realize that we're so blessed and so lucky to live in our community, but when you see blight, it's like a cancer that can spread through a neighborhood. So this is such an important job that kind of is overlooked.
Well, you raise a good point. So let's say a typical resident, doesn't matter what city, if his neighbors are not maintaining their lawns, if their neighbors have cars parked, junk cars in the driveway, many people respond, well, why should I act any differently? It's not going to help anyway.
Yep. Oh, and we see it time and time again. Oh, I'll just add my trash to that pile, right? It's kind of hard to, put out the flowers and keep your grass and, your property tidy if those around you aren't. So with that, though, when do you get code enforcement involved, or when should you? I mean, because sometimes you don't want to escalate a problem either.
You raise a good point. West Bloomfield Township is not a proactive community. In other words, our code officers, by the way, we have 4 full-time code officers. We have a 5th gentleman who's involved in vacant and rental property inspections and registration, and then we have an administrator. But these individuals, they're not engaged in what's called proactive ordinance detection. In other words, they're not driving around with a ruler attempting to find lawn that might be 9 inches instead of 8 inches. The grass hasn't been cut. We respond to complaints. In other words, if you're living in West Bloomfield, you don't want the big bad wolf to be code driving around. It's like people who live in condominiums. They know what that's like. You have a fella or a lady with a clipboard walking around and detecting all these violations.
I used to be on the board. So my neighbor, by the way, at midnight one time, Steve, he caught me. I was out there trimming his yard and his weeds. It was midnight, and I know I got busted.
Well, unless it's a serious matter, extreme blight or a danger to the community, we're not driving around knocking on your door, leaving notices telling you to clean up your property. It's all based on whether your neighbors have complained. In terms of that, the complaints are anonymous. So your neighbor, you don't like what he's doing, you live 2 houses away from him, across the street, you call code enforcement or you call the supervisor's office, and we're not asking you your name. We don't need to know your name.
Oh, I like that, because when you live next door to someone, it can get a little uneasy. So I like that it can be anonymous. Calvin, I think we have a graphic. So there are different ways that people can report it. I believe they can call. There's a number for people to call. There's also, you can go online and a form to fill out, or you can just stop by the office.
An anonymous call, an anonymous letter, it all works. It's not like a criminal case where, oh, it's a hearsay statement, we need to verify. We don't need to verify it. We accept it as perhaps true, and then we have a code officer visit that day or the next day.
So once they visit, what happens after that point?
If the officer is able to validate that a code violation has occurred, and by the way, this is not subjectivity, it's not one man's belief. I don't like that car in the driveway, and the other says, well, I don't like the fact that there are dandelions. It's all based on objectivity. But if the officer detects that there has been a code violation, what he or she will do is leave a notice at the house. It's a form. It says, please contact code enforcement. There's been a code violation. And most people call. It might be they don't know.
Yeah.
They might not know that the garbage cans should not be left in the front of the garage. They might not know that a fence is not allowed to penetrate the front yard. People are good. Our West Bloomfield residents, we want them to enjoy themselves. This is a wonderful community. So it's not the big bad wolf driving around for a gotcha act.
Right. So so they leave a notice or knock on the door. It's like just that, hey, it's a friendly reminder.
Yes, that's what it is.
If they ignore the reminder, and let's say the code enforcement officer visits the property and does indeed see they are in violation, what happens if they continue to ignore the notice?
You raise a good point. If it's a serious blight violation, then there might not be a second notice. We can always issue a ticket. It's a misdemeanor ticket. It's $500 maximum. We don't generate very much revenue. It's actually a loss when you determine how much money is brought in through the courts. But the court is always there to help us. So if the person will not remedy the violation, rectify the violation, then court is the next step. But I'd say 95% of these matters, Ronnie, are resolved because the resident realizes that maybe he's acted inappropriately and he'll be able to rectify it. I'll give you an example. You're walking in your neighborhood and you notice there's always the same car parked in the driveway. It doesn't move.
Yep.
In West Bloomfield, we do not limit the number of vehicles that you can park in your driveway. The issue is it operable and is it properly tagged? So we can determine from the street the tag. So if the plate is expired or you have a flat tire, then we'll intervene. There are residents who say, well, why don't you limit the number of vehicles to 2 in a driveway? Because nearly everybody has a garage. And that's because we don't want to micromanage people's lives. If you have 3 children at home and each one owns a car, we're not going to tell you that one of the cars has to be parked across the street.
Right. Well, and everyone's home is set up differently as well. Like, you know, my driveway only can fit 2 cars,
Yes.
but other driveways can fit up to 4 or 5.
Right. So there's a house nearby here. There always are 6 or 7 vehicles parked in the driveway, and these are older cars. They're sedans. They're probably from the 2000s, and we receive complaints from time to time. I'm not mentioning names or streets here, but we tell the residents there isn't anything we can do. Our ordinances now limit the number of vehicles that you can own and park.
So can I ask you about the ordinances? How does it work? Can they be changed, or how often are they really changed?
Yes. So we would amend an ordinance under 2 circumstances. One is it's just draconian. It's going to be violated anyway. Maybe it's something we shouldn't be regulating. I'll give you an example. Our ordinance says in terms of your garbage cans and recycling container, they should be kept in the garage or in a fenced area where they're not visible. That's just not practical. And it could be, we might amend that ordinance where as long as the trash containers and recycling container are maintained in an area away from the street and are not junky, they're not rusting and torn and broken. So we might amend that ordinance because it's unenforceable.
It's funny, one time we tried to throw away a trash can.
That's difficult.
It really is. People don't think about it. But and getting a new recycling bin can sometimes be a bit of a challenge as well. At least it was during COVID. But what are the typical violations, Steve?
Good question. Number 1 would be garbage. People just junk. The house not being maintained on the exterior. Broken shutters, peeling paint. Now, one might say, well, who are you, Township, to tell us that we have to have immaculate properties? We don't. But when it reaches a point of blight, and what is blight? Blight is very subjective, but I can give you examples of blight. But that's probably the number 1 complaint. My neighbor is not maintaining his home, and we're not happy. It affects me. I don't want to look at it. It affects my property values. Another one might have to do with something that's dangerous, like parking your car let's say you live on a street which is a busy street. It's not a main street, and your neighbor is parking his car half on the grass and half on the road. Well, eventually somebody's going to hit that car, and nobody wants to look at that car. We'll intervene when that happens.
So what do you want people to know? Should they try to maybe knock on a neighbor's door first, or it's more about every situation is different?
Society's changed. Many people don't even know the individuals who live next to them or across from them. When you and I were growing up, of course you're much younger than I am, we knew the neighbors. We knew their first names, we knew their last names, we knew where they attended school, we knew what their jobs were. But today many people don't want to meet their neighbors. They want to avoid it. But sure, you can say to the neighbor, listen, I'd really appreciate it if you could mow the lawn. It just isn't sightly. He's probably not going to respond well. He's going to say, lady, don't tell me how to operate. I pay taxes. I bought this property.
Right.
I don't need your help. Call us. We'll intervene for you.
That's what you're there for. And how often is it vacant properties? Is that a big problem now coming out of COVID, or not so much?
It was more of a problem in 2008 and 2009. Now, the township enacted what are called requirement for vacant and rental property, real properties. We had ordinance requirements where you had to register with us and we would inspect. And that was because with the market, as you remember, the crash in 2008 and 2009, many residents were living outside of West Bloomfield and renting their homes. And renters are wonderful people.
Exactly.
But all other factors being equal, a renter is less likely to devote as much time, energy, and funds into maintaining his property as a person who lives and owns his house.
That is so true. I remember talking to a police officer. He said, you want to help eliminate some of the blight problems and crime problems? Have people buy a home.
Yes.
When you own it and you can't pick up and leave, you're a little bit more invested in it. So, Steve Kaplan, we so appreciate having you in person and with us to explain this, because I would imagine it gets a little bit busier in the summertime for your code enforcement officers. But thanks for your time. And again, everyone, if you have an issue or a question, just go to the township's website. It's on there. Do a quick Google search. You'll find it. Steve Kaplan, great seeing you.
Ronnie, thank you. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.